It's me. Whatever that means.
Start slowly.
It's an identity.
Our next panel is identity and spirituality. And our first speaker is Beshara from University of West Georgia in the US. And he will be talking about psychological construction of reality and about Buddhist psychology and knowledge.
Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is going to be a theoretical presentation. I hope it's going to be fun. There are some overlaps in terms of the ideas that I heard other presenters talk about, and there are also some things that haven't been really covered. So I hope this is worth your time. So this is the title of the paper, The Psychological Construction of Reality, an essay in the Buddhist psychology of knowledge. But basically I adjusted it, worked on it. I did something special for this presentation, so there's like a modification a little bit. So really, because in the paper I focus on identity, transformation, and social change. So I just obviously narrowed down on identity to expand that more and for the purposes of this conference. Before I start, actually, I want to just give you a little bit of biography. Because my personal history is kind of a testament of how complex identity is for me and for many people. So I was born in Cairo, Egypt, and I grew up there. My father is a Coptic Christian, he's an Egyptian, and my mom is Polish, and she's a Catholic. I went to a French Catholic school, Beshara Famille, also known as Jesuit. I grew up in a largely Muslim society. Most of my friends are followers of the Islamic faith. Then I went to the American University of Cairo. Now I'm living in the States and I have US citizenship. And I'm a follower of the Buddhist faith. So it's like all over the place. How do I really make sense of this, right? So imagine I struggle with this every day. So this gives you a sense of this multiplicity that's involved when it comes to this question of identity. And there could be more extreme cases. So these are some sources of inspiration. I was really inspired by Peter Berger and Thomas Luckman's book, The Social Construction of Reality, which is a classic from the 60s. I have the book here for you. But basically I agree with the idea of the social construction of reality, and what I'm going to talk about is the social construction of the self, but also extend that to talk about the psychological construction of reality and the self, since that's my field, psychology. And I draw from Buddhist psychology, especially the teachings of Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. I have one of his books here, one of my favorite books, Megan, The Heart of the Buddhist Teaching.
It was there.
Why I draw from Buddhist psychology, not only because I follow a Buddhist path, but mainly because I think that Buddhist psychology has a lot to say on the mind, how the mind works, and I find a lot of the knowledge there to be more valuable, in my opinion, than a lot of things that come across in Western psychology. So when we think about identity, these are some images that come to mind, and some of my colleagues here refer to these. What do you see on up there?
Reality.
Right. And so you see the famous oracle at Delphi, and this is a shot from the Matrix. It says "Know thyself" in Latin. Remember, Neo goes to see the oracle, and he wants to know if he's the one or not.
Yep.
And he looks up and it's like, know thyself, right? And here it's in ancient Greek, right? So this question of self-knowledge, so when I'm talking about the psychological construction of reality, So I start from there, but this is not where I'm going actually. I'm going to take it in a very different direction. This is the traditional route. But first of all, we have to kind of think about technologies themselves, knowledge. In other words, how do we know the self? So the classic example is to look at a mirror and ask, who am I? Mirror, mirror on the wall, right? And you might be surprised what kind of answer you get there. Let's see what kind of answer you get. I'm the fucking Mona Lisa, bitches. I put this up there not to be vulgar, but to kind of point to something in pop culture. Selfies, right? The Mona Lisa has to use a smartphone, take a picture of herself to know who she is, know her value. This is her technology of self-knowledge. So this is kind of where we're at right now. And interestingly, the word selfie has been recently added to the Oxford Dictionary and Merriam-Webster Dictionary, which is pretty strange, if you ask me. So I say that in the West we fetishize the selfie and new technology, smartphones, and social networks. But is this really a practice of self-knowledge? Right? It's probably the opposite. And I want to change the question from who am I, because I think who am I is a kind of an outdated essentialist question, as if we're asking about something that's fixed. I want to change the question to how am I, this body-mind complex, in space-time, called Robert or Ranjan or Andrea or Martina. How am I integrating with the world? So focusing on the relational aspect of our experience. And also, another question that could be more relevant is, who do I want to become? Right? Not just who am I and thinking about the past, but where am I going? Thinking teleologically here. And we'll explore more of that. Some deconstructive questions to start with. What are self and identity? And you'll notice that my kind of definition of identity is a little bit idiosyncratic. It's maybe a little different from how people talk about it here. What's the relationship between these two concepts? Are they the same thing? Are they different? What's the relationship between consciousness and the unconscious? I don't think we can talk really about identity, especially as a psychologist, without referring to the unconscious, right? So we keep stressing the consciousness aspect of it, but the unconscious is equally, if not more important. We're in Vienna. So what's the relationship between knowledge and wisdom? Wisdom has been kind of left out of academia, left out of science, right? And I think that there's room for wisdom in academia and in research. And this is something that we need to think about. Not just knowledge, right? Knowledge is important, but other ways of knowing. Okay. And regarding the relational aspect, what is the relationship between the body, the mind, and the world? So these are kind of the large questions, and I kind of try to address these in the presentation. So the title of the presentation actually is not the title of my paper. The title of the presentation is Self and Identities. Okay. And I think this is a really useful image for me, the matryoshka. Some of you might be familiar with that image. And the way I think about the self is the biggest matryoshka on the right, and the smaller ones are the identities. And as you know, they're usually encapsulated inside. So we have multiple identities, and we have one self. That's kind of the argument that I make. And I'm going to talk more about what they are and their nature. But basically, you have your identity as someone who's presenting at a conference. You have your identity as a daughter, as a sister, as a wife, as a husband, as a professor. These are different identities, but I also have different identities as someone who gets angry, as someone who's happy. So it's very complex. It's hard for me to talk about identity as a singular concept when I see it really as a multiplicity. But the unifying concept for me, maybe it's the self. But what is that, right? That doesn't really solve the problem. So we still have to kind of define what that is. So regarding self and identities, I looked at different theories on self and identities, and I noticed that there's a lot of similarity between different theories, but they just use different words. So in Buddhist psychology, there's talk of the self and its khandhas, or aggregates, elements of the self. So that the self is made up of parts, basically. Obviously, Freud talked about ego and superego. So these are the parts, these are the identities. Self and parts, internal family systems model, or IFS. Self and complexes and archetypes from analytical psychology. Jung talked about this. You'll notice that the identities are more related to the unconscious and that the self is more related to consciousness. Self and self-personalities from psychosynthesis. So we're, again, talking about kind of the same thing using different words, right? So since one of my areas of interest is Buddhist psychology, so that's the one I kind of focus on the most. And in Buddhist psychology, I'm going to later talk about how in Buddhism the self is viewed. That basically the ideas of the self is made up of these 5 elements. Form is being the body. Feelings, we all have them. Perceptions, which is more about cognitive thinking, the way we categorize experience. And mental formations are kind of like habits or tendencies that we all have. Like you're fine now, something happens in your experience and all of a sudden you get angry. Where did that come from? There's this habit energy in your consciousness that in Buddhism is called mental formation. They're thought of as seeds that you have, that we all have, that we're all born with. But they can come into experience or they not. Depends on how mindful we are of these habit energies. In Buddhism, they identify 51 mental formations specifically. And then there's consciousness, which is, again, one of those big terms, what is consciousness, right? Well, in the Buddhist kind of framework, there are 8 levels of consciousness. The one that's mentioned here actually refers to the deepest one, which could be called seed consciousness or store consciousness. Another way to think about that is, in simpler terms, the unconscious. I mean, it's confusing, I know, but it's just different. Part of this is that people use different languages to talk about similar ideas. And these are the 7 other levels, basically 5 sensory ones, 1 for the mind, and 1 for the ego. The sense of I, that I am separate from others. Okay? So maybe when we talk about identity, this is the one we refer to, the ego consciousness. But I want to take this at a deeper level and also address the complexity, psychologically, that we're dealing with here. I'm going to go through this more quickly, but just to kind of refer to the idea of self and identities from different frameworks. Okay? And the IFS models, the parts that are called managers, firefighters, and exiles. And he didn't, Richard Schwartz didn't come up with this randomly. He's a therapist. He was trained as a family therapist. And from his therapy sessions with different clients, he realized that clients talk about, I have this part in me that does this, I have this part in me that does that, I have this part. So it's like we have these inner conflicts, different parts that want different things in. And so he identified that there's this pattern. And he called them these names. And Jung had this model of the psyche, with the self in the center, the ego, the shadow, this collective unconscious and personal unconscious and all of that. Well, one thing I think about is the therapy, another way of phrasing that. And this is something I'm interested in as a kind of a larger context because it relates to also the Buddhist, the aim of the Buddhist project, which is the elimination of suffering. So the goal of therapy is deconstructing identities to reconstruct the self. And deconstructing identities doesn't mean destroying them or destructing them. It means analyzing them, trying to understand them, trying not to identify with them, but see them for what they are, where they come from, why do I have this identity, what kind of environment did I grow up in, what was the influence of my parents or the influence of my friends, schooling, all of these different aspects that create these different identities or parts of us, right? So this reflective process, and we can call it individuation. And I'm going to talk about the difference between that and individualism, because these are 2 different processes. So the question is, who's in charge? We have all of these parts, so someone has to be in charge here, right? And that's kind of why I separate between self and identities, because I'm going to argue that the self has to be in charge, not the identities. This is Roberto Assagioli's psychosynthesis. It's, I don't know how, if anyone is familiar with this, but it's largely unpopular in the US, even though Assagioli was working around the time of Freud. And so he's an important Italian psychoanalyst who developed his own system. But as you can see, he has the self and then sub-personalities, or parts, or identities, right? Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with some Buddhist concepts, so I have to introduce some to be able to move on. But the main concepts that I want you to know are the Four Noble Truths, which is basically that suffering is a fact of life. We're all born into suffering. Now, that sounds really pessimistic, right? But the point is, we all get old, we all get sick, and we all die. So these are facts of life we can't change. And in Buddhism, that's acknowledged to be more realistic. And Buddhism starts with that because it ends somewhere else. So it ends with that, which sounds pessimistic. It's actually a realistic beginning. The point is, we recognize suffering, and then we try to understand the root of our suffering. Where does that suffering come from? You know, especially if we have a multiplicity of parts and identities, and we're confused, and we have inner conflict. What is the origin of this? So, trying to understand the root of suffering in our inner experience, and then realizing that there's an end to this suffering. Okay, and you know, I teach at University of West Georgia. I taught personal relationships, and some of my students